Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, members. We're now in open session for this afternoon's Education Committee. So I would advise members that today's committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and password details for that are available in the gallery rules, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. Okay, so that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. Don't have any apologies, and I can see that Cara is joining us online today. So hopefully everything will be fine with the audio, but Cara, obviously do let us know if there's an issue. Item 2 then on the agenda is chairperson's business. So just a couple of things I want to briefly raise. I think we'll all be very aware just of the devastating impact of Storm Eowyn over the weekend there, and that obviously impacted the school estate. So I think it is important just to put on record the number of EA staff who did work all through the weekend to get a lot of schools open who otherwise would have had to close without that out of hours intervention from the EA Estates team. So I think I would just like to put on record our thanks to the team for that work, and I would suggest if members are agreed that we write to the Operations and Estates team at EA just to put that thanks on record. Obviously it was a pretty unprecedented set of circumstances. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
I would also suggest it might be worthwhile writing to the department. Appreciate it is very much still a live issue, and there are some schools still struggling to reopen, but I would suggest it might be a good idea to write to the department just to get a full breakdown of how the storm response both departmentally and EA played out, and any lessons that have been identified in terms of preparedness for the future. Again, appreciate all of this was happening in real time, but I think if there are lessons to be learned, it would be good to make sure the committee are kept up to date with that. So if there's anything in particular anyone would want to suggest to add to that correspondence, and indeed are we agreed that we would write along those lines? Mm-hmm. Agreed? Okay. And the only other bit I wanted to highlight, and I know some members were able to get to it, I was genuinely privileged to be able to host the Ulster University team presenting their research this week on the profile of classroom assistants in Northern Ireland. It was a really insightful event and a really timely piece of research, so I'd definitely encourage anyone who hasn't had a chance to look at it to get a look. We've got a copy of the research there. Over, I think, close to 1,500 classroom assistants were interviewed about their views on their role, on their terms and their conditions, their role in the system, what works well and where they think there needs to be change. And I think listening to those frontline staff, it's absolutely crucial, and especially as we think about SEN reform. There are two aspects to it that really stand out. One, I think, is that post-pay and grading review, there remain still substantial issues with large numbers of assistants on temporary contracts, term time working arrangements causing real financial issues for a lot of classroom assistants, and still some real concerns around disparities in pay and experience level of staff who are being brought in on those temporary contracts. So I think there's a staffing element to it, but there's also an element in terms of their articulation of what they actually do in the system and how they actually impact particularly children with SEN, and how they feel perhaps they can be better utilised. Awful lot there, so it's a long way around. First of all, I want to acknowledge what a great piece of research it was, but I would like to suggest we do invite Ulster University in to actually present that research to us, because I think it would really help inform our thinking. And just picking up from Peter and your remarks in previous committees around educational psychologists as well, I think Michelle and I were both at a table with a senior academic from the university who actually delivers the training programme for EdPsychs, and some of her insights were really, really useful. So I think, again, if she could be invited to attend that, because she was sort of commenting on their EdPsychs are providing the recommendations that often classroom assistants are they deliver the outworking of that in the classroom. So it definitely all connects. So really just putting that out there if anyone wants to add anything, or are we agreed that we seek that briefing? Agreed. Sorry, Michelle, you wanted to come in?
Agree, and just put on record my appreciation for the research. It was an excellent event. It's really, really helpful and useful, and hopefully we can support the classroom assistants with what the outworking of this is. 100%, yeah. Really, really good.
That's great. It's rare. Sometimes you get an event where it just lands and it's so timely. I think a lot of the discussions around classroom assistance role, I think even the ones who were there, they were just delighted that people were listening to them. Yeah, but even regardless of what is done with it, just the listening in and of itself seemed to be appreciated. So that's great. Okay, so that moves on to item 3 then, which is declarations of interest. Can I just check, are there any items on today's agenda that any members need to declare an interest? No, as usual, if anything arises, do just indicate over the course of the meeting. Item 4 then is matters arising. Are there any matters arising that a member wants to raise? No. So then that takes us to item 5, which is draft minutes. So that is at page 8 of your packs, and it is a copy of the minutes of our meeting of the 22nd of January. So I would just want to seek agreement that those are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay. So that then takes us on to item 6. Are the witnesses here ready to come through? That's great if you want to bring them through. So item 6 on the agenda, we have our final 2 sessions today on our relationships and sexuality education inquiry. You'd think after all this time I'd be able to say that. And it's an oral briefing from Love for Life. So I'll just let the witnesses take a seat and get settled. We can do introductions. But initially I would just draw members' attention to the committee clerk briefing note at page 17, and then we have Love for Life's submission to our inquiry, which is at page 19 of your packs. So you're both very welcome here. And thank you for your time coming to committee today. I'd like to welcome Judith Cairns, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Love for Life, and Heather Joy Wallace, who is the School and Community Lead at Love for Life. And I've learned to say, if I got any of your titles wrong, please feel free to correct anything there that isn't accurate. So look, at this stage, no need for a big preamble. We are coming to the conclusion of our inquiry, so it's great to hear your evidence today. You'll be one of the last organisations in to get your evidence into the inquiry. So we'll begin with a initial presentation or any opening remarks that you might have. We would say up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. So over to yourselves.
Thank you. Well, you did such a good job of introducing us. We don't need to do it for ourselves. So
not a given.
Just thank you for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. You've already received our written evidence, and we really do welcome the opportunity to present an overview of our work and our approach to RSE. Formed in 2002, Love for Life is a Christian charity with a long-standing reputation in delivering holistic relationships and sexuality education in schools and in a variety of other settings, including community groups, church groups and higher education institutions. However, the focus of this presentation will refer specifically to our work in schools. In the 23-24 academic year, we delivered a total of 752 programmes to 47,792 pupils. Working regionally in the same year, we partnered with 48% of our primary schools and 54% of our post-primary schools. We also offer a range of programmes developed specifically for the SEN context, and we've been delighted to partner with a range of schools to deliver these. We partner with all school types, offering a range of programmes from P1 to Year 14. And in each of these programmes, we create a storyline to help us share our information effectively throughout each of those key stages. This creates an opportunity for the pupils to consider the information objectively. And each of our programmes are accompanied by a suite of lesson plans for the teacher to use before or after our visit. In agreement and partnership with the school, young people complete an anonymous evaluation form at the end of our post-primary programmes, if they're comfortable and happy to do so. And information collated through these gives us a helpful insight into their attitudes and behaviours, and also allows us to measure the effectiveness of our programmes. A report is then sent to the school to allow them to review the needs and responses of their individual pupils. Throughout this presentation, we will share some of the findings gathered from the 7,500 Year 10 to 14 pupils who took part in our programmes last year.
Love for Life advocates for a partnership approach to RSE. RSE begins in the home. Parents and carers have the most significant influence in shaping children and young people's attitudes, values and beliefs. as well as habits and practices around healthy relationships. This is evidenced in our evaluations when we ask pupils to indicate who or what are the major influences on their choices. Young people have consistently said that family has the strongest influence on their choice. Love for Life is committed to supporting and resourcing and partnering with parents and carers to secure the well-being of all children and young people. A positive, proactive approach to partnership includes providing information on programmes in advance of delivery, as well as offering workshops that will enable them to have important and ongoing conversations.
As an external agency that supports schools in their delivery of RSE, we appreciate the importance of operating within and respecting the ethos of the school, as well as adhering to school policies. We believe that effective, high-quality RSE teaching and learning provides young people the opportunity to examine their own values and beliefs in light of those held by others. In doing so, this can contribute to a more tolerant, inclusive society by fostering respect and understanding of difference and empathy for the views and emotions and feelings of others. We work hard to create an environment of welcome, safety, inclusion and respect. The knowledge, skills and values presented are important for all young people, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender. And they help them to make healthy choices and to build strong, healthy relationships. We are sensitive to the sexual feelings and identity dilemmas that young people are experiencing, particularly around sexual orientation and gender. And in acknowledging these, we want all young people to carefully consider what they deliver and what they deserve in a relationship, recognising the qualities that constitute a healthy relationship.
So our team used a creative animation to illustrate that there are many characteristics and aspects that people may use to describe their identity. We emphasise behind each of these identities is a person of value who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. We state that although we might not agree with someone else's beliefs and values, what is important is that we listen to and respect each other. As we create an environment of inclusion and respect, our aspiration is that young people can explore their differences as well as the values that they hold in common. In all of our programmes, we acknowledge the diversity of family life. We acknowledge with the pupils that families can look very different. We say that they may have a mum and dad at home, or just mum or just dad. Perhaps they live with their granny or a carer, or they have two mums or two dads. Each family is different and no family is perfect.
It may be presumed that because we are a Christian organisation, we are presenting children and young people with Bible and verse of Christian teaching and expounding on what Christians believe around sexuality. This is incorrect and is not the approach that we adopt in schools. The attributes and values that we identify in our programmes when it comes to healthy relationships are inspired by our Christian worldview, but they are shared across a range of worldviews and a diversity of beliefs in our society. We ground RSE in an understanding of the value and worth of every child and young person. No person loses their intrinsic value and worth, irrespective of any choices they make. And in light of this, all forms of bullying are challenged. And we also challenge the over-sexualised cultural norms, for example, the impact of pornography and the impact that it has on a pupil's development and their view of relationships. RSE should be grounded in a vision of healthy relationships, and we know that that is what young people consistently say is what they want to learn about. And we believe that educating the whole person in RSE provides young people with the opportunity to question the overall meaning and purpose of relationships and sexuality in human life. This is consistent with the curriculum objectives and the key elements of moral character and spiritual awareness. We know that education is more than just taking on board knowledge and information. It plays a formative role in character building and shaping citizens for the future. And in exploring pupils' sexual development and choices, our programmes prioritise a delaying sex message. Young people need time to develop and mature without the expectation to act on sexual feelings or to respond to the cultural pressure and expectation to be sexually active. Where there may be social expectations to be sexually active, We want young people to be reassured that resisting such pressure and saying no is a valid and possible choice. This is still the case, even if they've already made the choice to be sexually active in the past. We enable young people to understand the reasons why someone might choose to wait, even until marriage, before engaging in a sexual relationship.
In view of the preventative focus of the curriculum around sexual choices, the age of consent and the other laws around sexual behaviour should be upheld as protective legal standards. When teaching on consent, we give pupils the opportunity to reflect on the respect that consent confers on another person, as well as exploring the importance of clarifying and communicating sexual boundaries. We take 5 A's to help structure this conversation. Age, are they old enough? Able, can they give consent? Alcohol, has it been consumed? Agreed, have they talked about it? Always, has it been given this time? We encourage young people to set the bar high when it comes to their choices in light of their own value and what they deserve from a relationship. Our programmes incorporate messages around healthy relationships, skills development, and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information. We provide age-appropriate, reliable, scientifically accurate, and up-to-date information on contraception and STIs. This demonstrates a holistic concern for their overall well-being and their current and future sexual health. Provision of such information is not to encourage or endorse sexual activity. Following our programme, 84% of young people had an increased understanding of the various methods of contraception. In addressing the topic of unplanned pregnancy, we give pupils the opportunity to consider the different options presented within wider society: parenting, adoption, and abortion. We recognise that there will be a diversity of beliefs and values within society surrounding controversial issues like abortion and the important ethical questions raised when exploring sexual health topics. We present this information recognising that a young person's cultural context, faith, upbringing, and many other factors will shape how they respond, just like it does for each one of us. Ultimately, our approach in advancing holistic sexual health and well-being is more than just the absence of an unplanned pregnancy or an STI, but is concerned with physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and social well-being too.
And so as we conclude, we'd like to highlight some of the additional feedback that we've received through our evaluations. 81% of the young people said that the programme was helpful. 75% agreed that they would find it easier to make healthy choices in the future, even if their friends or peers are making different choices. 87% are more confident in knowing how the law on consent impacts any future relationships. 100% of our teachers rated the appropriateness of the information and also the performance of the team as very good or excellent. Teachers state that our programmes complement what they already do, and it is also of note that they say pupils learn more effectively as a result of our input. And so we thank you once again for your interest in this subject and the time that you have taken and allocated to meet with us today. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you again for your time. There's a whole range of things I could ask. One of the things I wanted maybe just to note at this stage is, and I mean this positively, is that we have learned as we go through the inquiry that there's often the evidence isn't that new, and there are common themes that come through every time, and in many ways that's been one of the reassuring aspects of this, that a lot of the organisations come in with a range of different perspectives. There are some common themes that do come through, but there are points of friction as well, clearly, and those have been aired in committee. So I probably want to go to one of those, but there are some other things I want to ask about, and I suppose it is around the tension that exists, and you have addressed it in your opening remarks, which is really around the extent of whoever is delivering RSE material, to what extent that is a directive role to sort of express a view on what the presenter might think on abstinence or sex before marriage, whatever the issue might be, or to what extent it is to set out choices available to young people and let that be dealt with, so the young people to examine that critically. You've set that out in your opening presentation. Can I just really get sort of clarity on that in terms of how you would see that being delivered in the context of a lesson and what that looks like? Because you have, in some parts of your presentation, emphasised that there is a value base to what you do. and then in others that it's very emphasised that it's objective. So just how is that balance struck in the delivery of a lesson?
It's a lovely question to start with. I guess for us, we're very clear, we're very open about the fact we are a Christian organisation, but our vision for excellent RSE is that we can hold those values and those beliefs, but when we are in a class, in a situation with pupils, it's not for us to teach what we believe. It is for us to present the options, to present the information, to make it as clear as possible for young people to explore how their own values and beliefs, whatever those are, will allow them to take on board the information that they receive. So to be clear, we do not teach what Christians believe. To be clear, our programmes are developed with those values in mind, and those values are shared across many of us in the room. I'm sure most of us in the room would share the values that we are championing in our programmes, such as respect, love, patience, kindness, all of those things. But we're not teaching what the Bible says in that school or in the schools. It's for a young person to explore this for themselves, to take the information, to take it away, and to think how they might then choose to interpret that in their own relationships.
That's helpful. And just to I'm reflecting back to one of the sessions that we ran, one of our informal evening sessions that we had with a number of stakeholders, and we had another group who present in schools, Informing Choices, who would be delivering sort of programmes in the same sort of context, but obviously from a more secular context would be their approach. And one of the things that they said, they've articulated this I think in their evidence to committee, was that they don't consider RSE is about changing anybody's mind. It is about facilitating the sort of objective critical reflection on what choices are available. Would you say as an organisation that you would be in a similar space to that it's not a job to change minds, it's about facilitating the reflection on the issues?
I think it's not a job to change minds. It probably depends the starting point. For some people, if they have an unhealthy view of relationships or an unhealthy view of how to treat each other, I would want to challenge that. But I don't think it's our role to tell young people what to do. However, there are situations where we are very clear, and I think we would all be clear here that we would want young people to understand the role of consent in a relationship. And if they don't think that's important, I would want to change their mind. But I also understand the view that it's not about necessarily enforcing that, it's about helping them.
To contextualise that, it was specifically around the issue of abortion. They were really making the point it's not our job to persuade someone they should be having an abortion. Their view is it's about setting out choices and options and letting young people reflect. That was really the context of that comment.
If we take that specific, that is what we do. It's up to the young person to reflect and to think, but we set the options that society presents before the young people, and it's not for us to say you should or shouldn't. That is not the role that we believe we have in a school. It is to set forward before them the options that society presents and allow them to consider them.
That's helpful, and I think your opening answer reflects some of the tensions that we've had on committee around navigating sort of age appropriate, scientifically accurate with values, because obviously if there are values being shared that are deeply unhealthy around toxic masculinity, you want those to be challenged, but we also want to avoid instructional models of telling young people how to think. So very conscious of those tensions. I'll just ask one other question and then I'll open it up to the floor. We've heard from a lot of academics in the inquiry. I'm sorry, you're coming at the end of the inquiry, so we have all of this material available to us. But academics have repeatedly emphasised, and they've used a very specific phrase, that abstinence education doesn't work. So that very formal just say no or wait till marriage. Now, you've been very clear in your evidence that you have an emphasis on delaying sexual activity. The evidence from academics was clear that actually the comprehensive, age-appropriate, scientifically accurate RSE actually delays, has the effect, the data shows that it delays sexual activity. Could I just sort of ask on that continuum of what would be classed as quite rigid abstinence education through to that comprehensive sort of model of RSE, where would your provision sit on that continuum, and what would your views be on that?
I think, as we've explained, it's the delaying sex. It's giving young people the opportunity to consider whether they want to be, whether they, even if they have been or haven't been in the past, what their views are on that. I think culture is putting pressure on young people. There are messages that young people can even presume that more of their peers are sexually active than they actually are. And our role in that is to say, pause, think this through, understand what you want, understand. I don't want a young person having sex because they think everybody else around them is. If they are choosing to engage in sexual activity, I want that to be something that they are stepping into, that they are choosing. We are delaying sex. Sometimes labels aren't helpful because they put you in a box. But we are definitely more than saying just say no. And we want to give young people the information that allows them to think those decisions through for themselves and to consider how they will respond. And the delaying sex message is one that's consistent with the sexual health, the most recent sexual health promotion strategy, where they wanted all 16-year-olds, all young people up to the age of 16, 92% of them not to be sexually active. So it is a message that is consistent across various departments, and so we are championing that. Let's pause, let's give space, there's no hurry, let's consider the messages, let's think how you might want to respond, but we're also providing information that for some, we could get criticism that we're providing information about contraception to endorse sexual activity, and that is not the case. This could be for the future, but we recognise it can also be for the present, and we want young people to have the information they need in whatever context they're in.
You answered the question I was going to follow up with around that supplementary information on the options for contraception as well. So no, that's fine. I don't have anything else to ask. So thank you for your presentation and for those answers. I'll open up to the floor. Deputy Chair, do you want to?
And thank you both for coming. A lot of the evidence we have heard during this inquiry would tell us that in jurisdictions where there are comprehensive RSE curriculums, it has actually led to a delay in sexual activity, fewer teenage pregnancies, fewer STIs, and so on. Would your own experience concur with that evidence that has been presented here?
So, can you define what you mean by comprehensive?
Well,
just so I'm answering it from the same perspective.
What do you think it means? What would you consider to be comprehensive?
You're asking me the question. So what are you asking me there in the comprehensive?
Well, I would be talking about a scientific, fact-based curriculum that gives people information about all aspects of sexuality.
Yeah. So if you're asking me, do I believe that is helpful? I mean, our experience has shown that actually over the years the stats are decreasing in young people being sexually active. We have gathered stats from over the years, and there is a decrease. Is that because they're getting this information? There's so many more factors, aren't there, to that? But I guess our vision for young people is that they would be given that information, that they'd be given the information that might be helpful to them now or in the future. And I think young people deserve that. I think young people deserve that information to help them make the choices that they might make now or in the future.
Well, I suppose just picking up on the point that Sharon made, in terms of promoting abstinence, the evidence we have heard is that particular approach doesn't help in delaying the age of sexual activity among young people. Would you agree with that?
I would say that to only promote abstinence is not a helpful message. I think it is a perspective that is in amongst lots of others, but to only present an abstinence message, I mean, my goodness, in anything for a young person to just say, don't do this, it's not helpful, but actually to give them the reasons why someone might choose not to is a helpful message for young people to consider, because I don't know that they're getting that anywhere else. And so I would want that alongside the other information that we've already discussed. Does that answer that?
Yes, it does indeed. And I mean, you make no secret of the fact that you're a Christian organisation, and we have had others from Christian organisations and churches, and some have said in terms of delivery of RSE, they want to overlay it with their own particular ethos. My difficulty with that is that there is conflict sometimes between a particular ethos and what some of us would like to be delivered in an RSE curriculum. So, for example, most of the Christian churches would see same-sex relationships as sinful. I think in the Bible it's described as an abomination. Now, if you were delivering a curriculum or a course on RSE, presumably you do touch on same-sex relationships. So how can you as a Christian give information to young people about same-sex relationships and not bring your own particular philosophical or religious viewpoint to that discussion?
I think we are delivering a message that is consistent across all contexts that we are in. And although we are a Christian organisation, we've stated we do not present Bible and verse of Christian teaching around that. We accept that there are many views in a room, and we respect that. And so we acknowledge that there will be a variety of relationships represented in a year group, and we're not there to condone, or to criticise anything that is happening of that nature. Our role is to affirm all young people and to encourage them to consider what they want in a relationship, whatever that relationship is, and to make sure that they understand what constitutes a healthy relationship. So, those are values that are, we want healthy relationships for our young people. That's consistent with our Christian worldview, but we're not going to get into the specifics of affirming or otherwise. We just want all young people to know of their value, their worth, what they deserve, to be treated with respect, all of those things, and regardless of the type of relationship they are in, those are qualities that we're going to be addressing and content that we're going to be bringing into the room.
Just one final question. Would your organisation introduce the issue of conversion therapy into any of these discussions?
No.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Michelle, you had indicated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. One thing you've highlighted in your briefing to us was around the importance of parental engagement, and that's something we've heard a number of times from other people who've presented to the committee. Can you talk me through how that works when you have agreed to deliver a course into a school?
So the school invite us in, and we offer to come and engage with parents face to face and run a workshop to explain what we're going to cover in the programme, if that's helpful. And some schools take us up on that, and some schools don't. And I think sometimes that comes from a trusted relationship, that the teachers are able to articulate what's in our programmes enough for the parents in the room. And it's hit or miss on how engaged parents will be in that. So we've had, we've delivered it at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we've delivered it at 7 o'clock at night, and you still get about 4 or 5. And it depends on where the school is and how they engage with their parents on other topics as well, whether they come into the school. But anyone who does come, it's received really well and is helpful, I think, as much for us facilitating a conversation amongst the other parents, and there's that feeling of actually I'm not alone in this, and I think that is as helpful as the content that we're bringing as well.
We also make the information available on our website as to exactly what we're covering. So we want parents, we want teachers to know. We're not hiding what we cover. So we want them to be able to explore it and to have the heads up as to exactly the subjects that we are going to be raising, so that they can continue the conversation. Now, nobody's policing that. Nobody knows whether those conversations continue or how awkward they get. But our role is to give them the best opportunity they have to navigate this with their young people. So that's what we do.
Great. That's reassuring. You, whether they take up the opportunity of the workshop or not, you do make the information on what you're going to be covering available, so parents all have the opportunity to access that themselves if they need to. That's really good. You also mentioned it, and this is reassuring as well, that we challenge all forms of bullying, including homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying. Can you tell me how you approach those kind of challenges when they emerge?
Yeah. So I guess throughout the programmes, and you can maybe pick up on some of the specific content, but I guess throughout the programmes, we are, from the get-go, we are establishing that every single person in the room has value and worth. You'll probably hear that a number of times because it's just so core that people know that and they deserve to be treated with respect. So we will create scenarios, we will look at various scenarios where that might jar or whatever, and we really do want any young person to know that bullying is unacceptable regardless of what it is about. And we would want young people to seek support if they are experiencing bullying for any of those issues. We are naming, in the identity illustration that we mentioned in the animation, that we are naming some of the labels that can cause friction. But we are also encouraging young people not to put people in boxes, but also not to treat each other differently because of some of those labels and identities that they might hold. So that's as specific. Is there anything further in that?
Any examples of when it's come up? Is there anything like a specific incident maybe that's come up that you've had to deal with?
A specific incident. I could give you an example of how we bring it out in the programme, if that's helpful. So if you imagine that you're year 8 or year 9, we open the Banter Clinic, and so we bring up Dr. Banter, who is the person aimed to have the most banter in year 8, self-proclaimed often, but they come up and we present scenarios that might happen, and the idea is, is this banter? So one of them is, you drop a plate in the canteen and everyone cheers. Is that banter? Is it bullying? And it's helping them make the distinction, actually, what moves something from just a bit of banter into the category of bullying. And some of the definition of that is if it's a repeated occurrence, or to look out at how the person in the scenario is reacting to that. And it's often received very well. And it is funny because Dr. Banter often starts off with this big, yo, but actually by the end, he or she is pulling the whole year group with them, and they're like stepping up to the mark of, I can do this. It's a good moment. So that's one of the examples.
Thank you. Just one last thing. You also refer in your briefing to your sensitivity towards young people exploring their sexual identity, gender, etc. And you comment that there may be additional pastoral support required. What do you mean when you say additional pastoral support?
I guess for any of the issues we raise, we're covering a lot of ground in the presentations. It can raise lots of things for a young person, and I guess I would want our programme to be the start of a conversation if it isn't already started. So for a young person who may have extra support needed to work through their feelings, to maybe think about if there's bullying, it is as wide as it comes, but if they need extra support or help, to consider how they might explore their relationships, what they might do in that, then that needs to be done in a relationship setting. And so we would be encouraging all young people throughout the programme that if they need help, support for any reason, including their sexual orientation or gender, for example, that they would seek that pastoral care, that pastoral support from somebody who they would know and trust. We want to open the conversations up. We don't want to close them down. We constantly talk about this is, it is an ongoing conversation that we are part of and that we're entering into, and the narrative exists both around them culturally. It also exists in their classroom and how they engage with each other. And there are times where there might be a specific need for a variety of reasons where a young person needs extra support and help. And we want to make sure they know that help is available and that they know who they can turn to.
Would you signpost them specifically to anybody, or?
What we tend to do is signpost to their pastoral care in school, but throughout the programme we would also then signpost to the Health Trust website in their area, because it is full of resources and full of support and access to various support, because there's such a range of ways something just might impact and trigger help that's needed for a young person. So we signpost to the Health Trust website that then offers the support that they might want. But we really encourage, I just don't want any young person going through something challenging on their own. And so you want them to plug into a relationship is the key with a trusted adult. And from their from the youngest child in one of our programmes right through, that exists. We all need people in our lives who can journey with us. And young people who are navigating the complexity of life across these subjects, deserve that. So we encourage them to take that up, either within school or outside of school. It's a trusted adult, but recognising that many schools in our experience have excellent pastoral care. that then can help them individually.
They maybe have a conversation with you, you'll refer or suggest where they might get additional support. You're not perhaps going to the school and identifying a particular individual with a concern. It's the child who will self-refer to the person that they need support from.
Yeah. I guess just in our approach to this and in our methodology, it's rare that we would be in an individual conversation, and we recognise the limitations of that, but there is a role for it, so in us, bringing the information in, we very much recognise that we want this conversation to be continued, and that's why we provide lesson plans, and we also recognise the limitations of that, so at each point we're doing what we can, but we understand the limitations, but we are absolutely committed to seeing that this area is prioritised and that young people have the support that they need for whatever that reason to develop strong, healthy relationships.
Thank you.
Dana, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose, like, coming from a young person's perspective, we listen and talk to them as well. And for them, they're telling us that they are not getting adequate RSE. What would your view be for evidence that you've built up? Are our young people currently getting enough?
Are they getting enough? No. I guess we want to see RSE prioritised more. Enough is what is enough? But I think sometimes, and this is, so I agree, I don't think they're getting enough. But I also want to recognise that sometimes when we don't say, here's the sign that says this is relationships and sexuality education, sometimes young people don't even realise they're learning RSE. So I'm just wanting to acknowledge that they're learning about relationships from they walk through the door.
Because we have heard that from young people when they say, and groups have come in to us and says, but they don't know that they're getting it. I don't know if that's a good thing when I talk to young people, because they talked about learning through, I think it was a cup of tea. I've never seen this video was played, so I can't remember exactly. It was during our we working groups. They says it was about consent.
Yeah.
They didn't know what that really meant. So if you're shy enough and you're not getting it, then you're not getting that scientific based RSE, and
so I think there's a both and. There's a recognition that, to me, there's the formal setting that we do need to name things, and that needs to be done more. We need to step forward. Adults need to step forward more confidently in a variety of settings to have these conversations. Absolutely. Young people need to know this is what we're teaching, but alongside that, I just want to recognise that we are teaching young people about relationships without being in a classroom. Young people are learning how to be a good friend and what is acceptable and not in a variety of settings across the board. So that's not formal education, but it has its place, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, to come back, I'd love to see them getting more.
So I suppose, what would your view be on the parental opt-out? And I say this coming from a perspective, again, it came from one of the workshops that we were in, that a young person was being abused in the home, but didn't recognise they were being abused until later in life. So if you have to get permission from your abuser to get education, that's an issue. And and that's where our struggle then with the opt-out option is there.
Yeah, and I guess I want to see RSE delivered in a way that parents don't need to opt out. That actually they trust what's happening. I think there can be suspicion, and that's why we want to be open about what we're covering. And we want parents to be able to opt in. Now, you've mentioned a specific situation there, and that is horrendous. And I would want young people to have the support that they need to be able to recognise those unhealthy relationships and what's happening there. But I equally, it is, as you will have discovered, and you probably already knew before these conversations, there's tension throughout, and there's, if you say yes, what's the no, and all of those things. So I want parents to be respected in their role as parents, and I want to give parents, their place, but equally there's unhealthy situations there that need challenged, and that's the tension. But my ultimate vision is that for the vast majority of amazing parents, that they would look in and go, there's no reason for us to opt out. These are great conversations. Let's embrace them with our young people.
And I agree, but again, that option then there, then you have to ask the question is, why even put the option in for an opt-out if that's the case? Because the great parents out there shouldn't be worried. And it's about the most vulnerable children in society.
That's
that then
the challenge.
it is. No, thank you. Thanks very much.
You, Danny. Colin, you'd indicate it next.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. Really informative and really helpful, so thank you for that. I had 2 questions, but Daniel already asked one, so I'll just ask the one. Are there any particular challenges or success stories you as an organisation have faced delivering RSEs within schools here in Northern Ireland? So challenges and possible success stories of how you actually are delivering and have delivered RSE.
I would imagine you would understand that we have experienced challenges delivering RSE. You know, we live in a culture where there's a variety of views, and you know what, this stuff is really hard to articulate sometimes and to gain understanding across those views as to what we are actually saying and delivering. I think one of the challenges I describe it is like being in a little tightrope. You know, it's like you're trying to give young people this amazing vision for their relationships without. So I'm going to take an example. You know, the reality is if young people are sexually active and they're engaging in a number of sexual relationships, you know, with different people, they are increasing their risk of sexually transmitted infections. That's scientific fact. There are ways of reducing that risk, but that risk is still there. How do we teach that information without making sex seem dirty, seem awful, seem like something that should be avoided forever? That is a challenge. You want young people to have a great vision for their sexual lives, you know, and you're wanting to give them the information that might help protect them, but we're not wanting to make it seem dirty or awful or, you know, something that do you know what I mean? That's a challenge. So I think there is both an incredible opportunity and a desperate need to teach this, but those challenges are there, you know, and that's just one example, but it is there. Is there a second part to your question? Successes. Yes, I knew there was something to add. I guess one of the successes is I'm going to celebrate as an organisation for a moment that actually as an organisation, you know, we started off with one programme, you know, for year 10, 11 pupils, and actually the opportunity has been there to extend that and to grow that and to develop that. And so now those programmes are ranging from P1 right through to year 14. And the themes that we're embedding and seeing, we want young people to recognise the inappropriate touch in P1. We want them to see that. Now, we're not using that sentence, you know, but it's we're wanting them to understand and know, to know how, what good relationships look like, what healthy relationships are. And you know, schools are welcoming that, where there might have been, I've been in post 14 years and I've seen a big change in the taboo, so to speak. Could there be more change? Yes. Do we need to challenge the taboo? Yes. But I am encouraged to see more and more schools bringing in the conversation earlier and earlier so that we can build young people and develop young people from P1 and before right through to be understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like, so that down here, if something happens, they recognise it. That's a success, one of many. Yeah. And the fact that young people are telling us this is helpful, I'm like, that's a success. You know, do they need more? Yes. Could we be doing more? Yes. But what you are bringing is helpful. That's a success.
I was going to add to that a success is when they tell us that discussing puberty was fun.
Yeah.
You know, I think that a subject that could be potentially awkward, they've enjoyed themselves and haven't realised that they're learning, and they are. And the other wee one that stood out was we have a storyline that goes from P1 to year 14, and sometimes they come up at the end, they're like, what happens next? And again, it's that we've engaged them in a conversation, they want to know more. That feels like success in that, what you've asked.
No, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Peter, you did.
Great, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation this afternoon. I just want to touch on a couple of figures that you mentioned on the way through, and as part of the inquiry, we have heard significant evidence. Danny touched on some of it in his earlier question about the problems with RSE provision, the fact that some children feel it's really poor, it's maybe non-existent. We've had academics come and affirm that. Now, to be fair, some of those academics, some of those were very small, some of them were very qualitative studies, but the general picture that this committee has been left with is that RSE provision is pretty poor here, and to a degree pretty poor on the mainland where some of these academics have come from. So when I looked at your report and looked at some of the figures, 3.6 here, it says 82% of 11 to 14-year-olds have a stronger understanding of the difference between a healthy and unhealthy relationship. 78% of 13 to 18 said they had the opportunity to reflect on and evaluate how their attitudes, values and beliefs will shape the choices they make. I think any of us as MLAs would take an 82% approval rating. That's 4 to 5 young people who are going through your programs who are actually not only reflecting that they're positive. Are these anonymous? Did you say on the way through they're anonymous? Okay. So, I mean, I think that's, I was quite stunned to be honest, when I saw those figures. Can you give any reason for this dichotomy in the fact that the programs that you're delivering, the young people are finding benefit from and possibly enjoying? I don't know. I'm not going to, go jump to there, but they're certainly finding significant benefit from. And the fact that the committee has been left with an overwhelming sense that actually RSE provision is either poor or non-existent. Any thoughts on that?
Probably sit for the rest of the afternoon musing on that. I think
we have space because the forward work plan.
I guess as I look in, we are responsible for what we are delivering, and that this is positive. There's positive results. It comes back to the could there be more? Yes, there could. And perhaps even in some settings, young people aren't receiving what others are. And I would want to see all young people receiving this information. So I don't know why there is such a difference, but all I know is what we're responsible for and what we are hearing from young people and experiencing in the schools and the settings that we are in. They are engaged, they are involved. But I do wonder, does it come down to could there be more? Yes. And I think there's, within that, there's potentially pressures. I recognise we're asking a lot of our schools and our teachers, fairly in many ways, but we just need to recognise the challenges teachers are under and the timetable challenges, all of that. Does this matter? Yes. It's our whole existence to make sure young people receive this information and receive the best that we can offer. But I wonder, does it reflect the wider cultural pressures that they're under? You're speaking, things change constantly, so as soon as you've got one thing sorted, there's something else that's coming in that's putting pressure on them. I don't think we can underestimate that. So I'm not sure if that answers that effectively. But
yeah, no, that's okay, Judith. I mean, it's just to reflect that, when you give children the chance to put like an anonymous questionnaire and say how good was that, they can be quite critical. So I just want to reflect those are very impressive stats that you presented from large. I think I saw 7,600 respondents. That's a chunky sample. I'll just make one more comment, and it's not so much a question, but it was in 3.26 of your evidence, and it was another one of the figures which also was quite noteworthy. 78% of 11 to 13-year-olds felt more equipped to discuss their boundaries and relationships, and I think that's really, really pivotal, because we've heard a lot about consent. It's been talked a lot about in committee. It leads into other areas in terms of some areas of domestic violence and violence against women and girls. And I just wanted to highlight that. I thought that was really, really positive. If those are the outcomes that you're getting, and if we're talking about linking some of these themes together that we talk a lot about in the Assembly and in this committee, I think if you have a programme that's delivering 4 to 5 11, 13-year-olds are being empowered to discuss this, I just think that's incredibly positive, So that's just more of a comment, Chair, than anything else.
Thank you, Peter. David?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation so far. I think I just want to say, actually, I think it's been a very useful session in terms of something certainly I've talked about at the committee before, which is, and I think both sides, on the particular issues of division, I think both sides have a tendency to view each other or each other's organisations with a degree of scepticism. And I think you've done an excellent job, I think, of speaking to how I view, you're not a school, but how I view Christian ethos within schools, which is they're in the background influencing, inspiring what we teach, but not necessarily, trying to indoctrinate, which is sometimes I think and I understand that those from a similar view of me sometimes view other organisations skeptically in the same way, but I think you've done an excellent job of explaining what I try to get across sometimes, so thank you for that. In terms of the, we've talked about opt-out earlier. Have you experienced many opt-outs of your from your programme? And if so, what are the rates? How often does that happen? Is it in every school, or what is it an exceptional circumstance?
From our understanding, it would be an exceptional circumstance. So, we're basing this and basing that evidence on that when a school books us, they give us the estimated numbers of presentation, and then whenever we go in, we literally count the pupils. And, knowing that there's a few pupils who might not have made it into school that day, there's not a massive difference in those figures.
So you wouldn't be furnished with, if someone has opted out, you're not necessarily told that they've opted out?
Not necessarily.
Okay, fair enough.
Now, we also welcome, again, it builds into the communication with parents. We do receive regular phone calls and emails from parents, and we really want to engage parents in the conversation and to help them understand what we're going to cover, potentially to reassure them, to talk through what is going to happen and how the conversation is going to go. So some of those end up, a parent is about to opt out their student, and actually then after the conversation they're reassured. And I guess this is where that tension exists again, because a parent who is really engaged, now we recognise it could be for the wrong reason, and wanting to, but actually we want to give parents that ownership. But we certainly haven't experienced a massive opt-out, but just to say that sometimes that comes from a variety of perspectives and a reason why someone might opt out.
Yes.
Along the beautiful worldviews that we all hold, there could be a variety of reasons. It's not from one perspective or another. There can be a variety.
And then
of
advocating
reasons.
for an opt-out, I'm not advocating for an opt-out of people who just think like me, but actually, parents' right to parent their child. That's where it comes from. But there is a tension. There's tension for us all, and I recognise that as well. I recognise the example that Danny laid out. I do think actually though that Peter laid out one set of stats. I thought the stats from the parents were remarkable. 99% feeling they're more informed about influences and pressures young people face. 97% feel better equipped to begin or continue the conversations covered. 99% feel inspired to help children or young people understand how unique and valuable they are. There's not an organisation out there that wouldn't like stats like that, to be fair. So I think you're doing something right in that, and I think that actually do you, and we've heard this from a range of organisations from a range of perspectives. You do, and you spoke. My original question would have been closer to Michelle's there, but you do believe that's key, actually getting parents on board to make sure those discussions continue. And do you think it should be a prerequisite to some of this that actually those resources that are used for RSE are available to parents in schools to build that trust?
Just keep me right, because I feel like it was quite
Sorry,
a few questions.
I'm known for rambling on. The chair will tell you. Sorry. Yes, that's.
Submissive.
Never one question when five will
Yes, yes.
So now I have distracted
Fair,
myself
Yes.
with what I need to answer. So I guess for parents who want to opt out, that choice is there. The conversations do need to happen at home. I guess young people are telling us family is the strongest influence. What we recognise in parents' talk is it's not always good.
Okay.
Our influence is not always good
Yeah.
as parents, but it's there. And we have influence as parents. So I'm now being the parent in the room, but we have influence as parent. The question is, how are we using that influence? So I would want parents to be engaging in these conversations. There's sometimes you hear messages that you're wanting a conversation to start, and then you're wishing it could stop because you're thinking this is not helpful. So you want helpful conversations. You want the young person to feel that they can open up the conversation at home, and to work it through in a very similar way to what we would be doing. But equally, the role of parents is to help their child navigate this world and navigate how they interpret what the information is before them in a way that is positive for their own context.
One more, Chair, is that right?
We're very quickly, so quick question, quick answer, and then we'll draw to a close. Yeah.
One of the things that's come up routinely, perhaps unsurprisingly, due to the conversations that are out there in the public sphere at the moment, we've heard about is this toxic masculinity piece. Have you? I think whenever I was younger, there was anything from lads' mags to music videos and all of that was still pushing the sort of sexualized image out there, but we've heard more probably talk recently of things like Andrew Tate and all of that's probably one of the more quoted ones. But have you seen a change in some of those influences in social media and how that's really affected particularly young men's minds? And I guess that's what I'm saying. Have you encountered that rise, and how do you counter that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And can I add a sentence to that? I know it's quick. Yes, and I think one of the major concerns we would have as an organisation is the prevalence of pornography. And I would add that it affects men and women. I think it affects how a woman is viewed, but also how men are viewed, and how women and men, how everybody relates to one another in their view of each other, and that concerns me greatly. And while I think sometimes there is a hesitancy to challenge behaviours in society, I think this is one we all need to get behind, and we need to be consistent and persistent with young people to help them understand what they're seeing, how it is impacting their view of themselves and each other, and ultimately their view of sex, because it is not healthy. And I think that is shaping, and the stats that we gather that show the prevalence and the enormity of that issue. It's 30% of these young people have viewed pornography, but if you start to dig into that and unpack that age-wise, it's half of our 15-year-old boys are viewing pornography on a weekly or daily basis. And my question is, what is that doing to their view of themselves, relationships and sex? But I don't want to lose the female in that, and how they then, the impact that it has on them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your conversation. Thanks, Chair.
Look, we're kind of coming to a close in terms of time, but thank you for the time you've given us today. If I could just finish with one question, and I try and draw this out from anyone who's actually involved in delivery in schools. We are thinking about what's actually in the curriculum. That's one of the things we do really want to get to in any final report. Consent and coercive control, those two issues have come up repeatedly through evidence sessions, and they're markedly absent from any minimum content order. Would you as an organisation, in terms of your interactions with young people in schools, would your recommendation be that is something that the department may want to look at to ensure that is consistently being delivered, those clear messages, both on the legal framework and the relationship framework that go around those?
I guess we've taken the minimum content and we have included those subjects in it because we believe the minimum content currently does provide the vehicle for those subjects to be taught. So if you're asking, do we think those subjects should be taught? Yes.
Was the question, I'll be direct, should the phrases consent, coercive control be explicitly referenced in the minimum content order?
Potentially, and then you start to get into oh my goodness, where do you draw the line with the phrases? So I'm absolutely not adverse to those subjects being taught or in, but it's just how we both include without excluding. What we have done is taken the minimum content and looked at culture and all that's going on with young people and used it to shape a programme that we believe is fit for purpose now. So
absolutely, obviously, no. Do very clear from your presentation you cover those issues. I suppose the issue is there's still a potential young person could leave education and not have had that covered, in their context. That is something that would be of a concern to me. But yeah. Okay, look, thank you very much for your time, and we really do appreciate it. Okay, so I think while the witnesses are just are seen out of the room, are there any actions other than the Hansard record going forward for the committee papers, or is there anything else anyone wants to flag at this stage as an action? No? Okay. That moves us on then to item 7 on our agenda, which is second briefing on the RSE inquiry, and that's an oral briefing from Women's Aid. So if the witnesses are able to come forward, we'll make a start. And while they get themselves settled, we have a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 26, We have correspondence from the Women's Aid Federation at page 28, and then there was also a written briefing that should be in your table papers as well, so hopefully members have had the opportunity to have a look at that. So with us today, you're very welcome, and thank you for your time to present to committee. We have Karen Devlin, who is a representative from the Women's Aid Federation of Northern Ireland, and Sonia McMullen, who's the Regional Services Manager from Women's Aid Federation. And again, if any of those titles aren't accurate, please feel free to add to your intro and your bio. But at this stage, really, there's probably no need for any preamble. It's very much over to you for any initial remarks and presentation. I would say up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move to question and answer. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. Thank you, Chair, and the Education Committee. I know you've heard an awful lot over the last few months around this subject matter. I suppose we're coming from the angle of preventative education and early intervention, and we want to talk about that today. So we're speaking on behalf of the 8 local Women's Aid groups. We're a membership organisation, so we work for the Women's Aid Federation, and then we work for and on behalf of the 8 local Women's Aid groups. So all of the work that we do around policy and consultation is talking to women, children and young people who have that lived experience. So it's really important today to bring the voice of those survivors into the room, and hopefully we will do that. We know there's a considerable amount of work that has been done in this area. I'm in Women's Aid almost 30 years, and we've been having the same conversations around RSE, and going into schools and the challenges we have. So I suppose if we look at the figures of domestic abuse here in Northern Ireland, they're staggering, they're stark. A domestic abuse incident reported to the PSNI every 16 minutes of every day. We've had 25 women murdered since March 2020. And it's really, really high levels. And I think, that's the important piece for us. For over 40 years, we've been talking about these kind of issues. But, we provide support. We look to increase protection and safety for women, children and young people who are victims and survivors of domestic abuse. But in the last financial year, we've provided specialised support for 527 women and 291 children through our network of refuges, and 5,293 children had mums supported, in Women's Aid services. And that's unbelievable as well. We respond to the needs of those people who come through our services, and they really inform all of our work. But I suppose we have been innovators, I would think, in relation to preventative education through our Helping Hands programme, which some of you may have heard about. So preventative education programmes that assist in prevention and early intervention. And I suppose the conversation around RSE, where a lot of it's looking at that post-primary piece, but I feel we need to be in a lot earlier, in primary schools, in early years, talking about those issues of healthy relationships and safety and consent, of course, which can be, discussed at an early age. But we do believe that healthy relationships should be on a statutory footing, most definitely. But we believe that our programmes within primary schools begin that journey, for children and young people. So over the last 14 years, we've been instrumental in the delivery of effective preventative education, focusing upon children's schools' capacity to promote and safeguard the welfare of children and young people. So we've trained 1,827 teachers, that's up until last year, and over 600 primary schools across Northern Ireland. And it's been a great relationship. We're going into the 15th year, and we're really, really proud of this piece of work. And we really do feel, as I say, and I think that's something we want to really reiterate and push through about at all levels, especially, in primary school. So the Helping Hands is for children aged 7 to 11. That's Key Stage 2. And I suppose what we're doing is we're building capacity within schools. We're giving the teachers the skills to be able to look for those signs and be able to have those conversations. At no point in the Helping Hands programme do we talk about domestic abuse. It's not that programme. Everyone has the right to feel safe. Others have the right to feel safe with us, and we can talk to anyone about what's going on for us. And obviously, we have the Helping Hand. And out of that comes more disclosures within all of those schools. And I think that's something, you know, we have to be very proud of as well. When teachers come in, it's a 2-day programme where we take them out of the classroom and we do the training for 2 days. Every teacher comes in with a family in their head, or a young person in their head, that they know is presenting these signs. But it's, you know, assisting teachers to understand that context. You know, you've talked about coercive control. You know, people still don't know what that means. We've got it in legislation, but we need to explore that more. You know, we see the figures around domestic abuse and sexual abuse peer on peer. That 16 to 25 year group is going up, you know, so something is not working. You know, most definitely. You know, I'm a mum of 3. Well, I've 1 teenager left, but they're all in their 20s. You know, and they didn't have that appropriate RSE within the school setting at all. Option to opt out or in of it, because it just simply didn't happen. But within the family conversations, we had that. But we know for our children and young people in our services, they're not living in a healthy relationship. They don't know what that looks like. So let's allow them. You know, the children that we have within our SAY project, our Social Action Youth Project, which we sent you a link to it. And we have a group of young people who have come together, who have been through our services within refuge, within outreach services. And they have said very clearly that they want, you know, an informed RSE programme, because they feel like these subject matters aren't being discussed. And if we think about domestic abuse, it's shrouded in guilt and secrecy and shame. And we have these children feeling that this is their darkest secret, that they can't talk to anyone about this because, you know, nobody's like me is in school. Whenever actually, you know, John, who's 2 seats up, might be experiencing that and living through this as well, you know. But what they told us was that they believed healthy relationships should include, but not be limited to, sexual health information, including information on contraception and abortion, healthy relationships and abuse and relationships. That is the key bit that came through for them. You know, consent, for example. They talked about how to help a friend who's in an abusive relationship or family going through that. Coercive control, they talked about that. And more information, you know, being inclusive around LGBTQI plus relationships, guidance and support. And they talked about that bystander allyship as well. What could they do if they're friends? You know, how could they intervene or talk about that? So that was something really important. But we've had a lot of legislative developments as well, which we welcome. And after COVID, you know, we developed and went through all of our programs to make sure they were trauma informed, for example. But one of the things that came out of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act was Operation Encompass. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. But, you know, their statistics only come out every year, so it was May of this year. Over 23,000 referrals to Operation Encompass into our schools across the north. Like, that is unbelievable. You know, and we know this is the tip of the iceberg, that not every person is calling the police and they're going through this process. So we really have to do better for our children and young people. It's a basic human right that our children and young people should be provided this, but at all levels, from early years right through primary school to post-primary as well. And we have to think of our children who are outside of the school setting as well. So we have to think of youth clubs. You know, we were part of the Hire project through the University of Ulster, and they work with Lagmore Youth in relation to that. And it was really powerful looking at that outside of the school setting and where else sports clubs as well and things. You know, I'm a committee member in a football club, and we've done a number of sessions around violence against women and girls. It's in our programme for government. You know, it's one of the key priorities there as well. We've just launched a violence against women and girls strategy. And so we've so many elements of that coming in, and some good news stories definitely around that. But we need to definitely look at creating the early years model. So that's what we're looking as well, our Helping Hands model. We're looking to develop it to increase the understanding of feeling safe and promoting early intervention in statutory and community early years settings. So we're really excited about that. We're working with Stranmillis University College in relation to that. And so, you know, I suppose in conclusion, we want to, you know, we have a Standing Up for Healthy Relationships programme, you know, in post-primary. It's very ad hoc, I suppose. It covers the areas of love, equality, trust, values, respect, allyship, or bystander models. and it's been funded sometimes through PCSP and different things like that, you know, within our local women's aid groups. But as I say, it's very limited and it's not consistent. And I think that's wherein lies the problem. You know, if we go back to the Gillen Review, it was one of the, you know, I sit on the training and awareness subgroup in relation to that. You know, we've been having these conversations for so long, so let's just get on with it and get a really good model that works. But I know that's difficult when you hear all the conversations and everything you have to consider. But, you know, we want our children and young people to be fully informed. Our women, our children and young people within our services tell us really, really clearly that they want children and young people to know the difference between a loving and healthy relationship, what unacceptable behaviours are outside that, and, you know, to give them the confidence and ability to draw the line at abuse is really, really important for us. And you know, and that's what the young people through our Social Action Youth Project would say. But, you know, we need to be informed by women, children and young people, because they definitely are the experts by experience. And I know you had an evening where some young people came up, but hopefully you'll be able to, you know, read our SAY project. They've launched a website, which I would encourage you all to look at as well. And we're hoping, they launched an animation as well last year. And that was looking at the Social Action Children's Champion and looking at all the professionals that come into contact with children and young people and how they can be better and do that job better. And so they have been absolute change makers and we're so very proud of them. But the website is amazing and that is exactly what they want young people to see. So we're putting it together as with the animation and the website as a training programme that will be going out through the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland that have helped us with that. So thank you very much. So
thank you. I want to just make a start on helping hands, sort of start at that primary level. And what I found really interesting was that dual approach of equipping teachers and then that they deliver the programme. So how important is it that we get that aspect of it right? Because I mean, we've touched on the issue of teacher capacity and the inquiry, but maybe not in as much detail as some other areas. So from delivering and being involved in that programme, can you give the committee an idea of how important getting that bit right so that teachers are equipped to deliver this material effectively?
That's really important. I love delivering it. It's one of the nicest programmes that you can deliver over 2 days. For us, it's really important getting the teachers out of the classroom. So we would go to another setting and have a nice lunch and sweets and different things because teachers don't get out. You know, it's a nice self-care piece for those 2 days as well. And I think the relationship with education has been really good. And we see it, you know, it matches the core curriculum, you know, it ticks everything for them. Some of our schools have embraced a whole school approach. You know, Newcastle Primary, for example, have every child's hand, you know, and they did it on a whole wall with regard to Helping Hands, and they have Helping Hands Week and they do everything, you know, and they incorporate it. Because I suppose whenever we started it, it was coming in at probably P7 really, and it was that transfer time after that for a lot of schools would have used it then, but it's gone down to probably about P5 now, P6, you know, as children have developed and everything as well. So it's a really good programme. The teachers, we can send you through the evaluation of the last evaluation that Helga Snedden did of the programme. And, you know, the evaluations are just so positive all of the time. They really, really are. And I think it's the environment, the way it's delivered, and the opportunity to ask questions all throughout the whole time as well, as I said, because teachers, they always have children. You know, I spoke to a teacher last week in a primary school in Belfast, and they had identified 36 children in that school that they knew were living in a home where there was domestic abuse, and that's only through those Operation Encompass statistics. They're only the ones, as I keep saying, tip of the iceberg. You know, for our children and young people, it's really, really difficult what they're going through. And I think it is a key component of RSA around the healthy relationships.
That link to Operation Encompass is really important. It's always been a sort of, in the back of my mind, it's great that link is now there, that schools are made aware, but then I sometimes wonder, do they know what to do when they have that information? And if that sort of input from yourselves will actually maybe provide a better framework of how you can support.
And a lot of our local women's aid groups across the country are getting contacted by schools every day, as are ourselves, wanting that support because of the numbers that are coming through.
Just one other question from me, and you listed them, so I'll not go through them again, but the things that the young people involved in your work have highlighted around what they feel need to be included in a programme. And we touched on this in the last evidence session, really around do we need to be more prescriptive, and that's been a discussion that's gone we've had in various evidence sessions here, to try and tick those boxes for the young people who are saying that's what they need to be learning about. Do you think the curriculum needs to be more prescriptive? Do we need to do something with minimum content?
Yes, but I'll hand you over to Karen.
So you mean, like, for example, explicitly saying coercive control and consent and things
Specifically,
like that?
yeah, on those.
I you know, our office gets calls from women who are in crisis, because you just Google Women's Aid, we're the first number that comes up, and I've taken calls from women who say, you know, I remember taking a call from a young woman, because you could tell from her voice, and she was like, there was an incident last night and the police said I should call you, but he hasn't hit me, you know. And then I went, okay, well, we're going to link you through to a support worker. But one thing that I, you know, in my job, and I do a lot of our comms, is busting that myth that physical violence is the only type of domestic abuse. I literally got an email from a woman 2 days ago, contacted our office going, I didn't know if Women's Aid helped because I thought you only helped with physical abuse. You know, so talking about what coercive control is, and talking about like the different elements of how abuse forms, because without that knowledge, a lot of people kind of never really click that what's happening to them is abuse and is an offence in Northern Ireland, you know, and that's something we chronically try and we repeatedly try and myth bust around that. So, for example, any communications that I put in social media, which is where young people get their news, where vast majority of people get their news now, I will always use the word domestic abuse instead of domestic violence, because people think physical abuse is the only form of abuse. But it is about sometimes you have to be explicit with consent, sometimes you have to be explicit about what coercive control is, and there is a way to do that and ease young people into a comfortable conversation. Because if I walked into a young people, 15-year-olds, and saying I'll talk to you about consent, obviously they'll maybe be incredibly uncomfortable. But there are training modules, and there's ways in which any good facilitators will be able to ease young people into having that conversation. But consent about anything, whether it be intimate partner or they have a friend who treats them toxically, you know, it's about healthy relationships with everyone in your life, whether it be a family member, whether it be someone who's your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or someone who is a friend who is mistreating you. Young people need to have that information, need to know what it's called, because coercive control is what it's called in the law, and that's the offence, you know.
Just to, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but again, because I mean we've heard from a lot of different contributors on this, the curriculum probably provides scope to cover those issues, but it doesn't explicitly name some of that stuff. Would you like to see it named in the curriculum so that it's clear what needs to be delivered, or do you think what we have is effective?
I think coercive control, in relation to the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act, if you think of the child aggravator that has been included within that, you know, we push for children to be seen as victims in their own right. It didn't go that far, but if you look at the figures coming through Operation Encompass, and forgive me, I don't know the figures for the child aggravator in the last year, but they're very low, you know, in that comparison. So I think definitely the issue of coercive control, it's in law now. We have a child aggravator. I think that, you know, would be a good way of moving that forward.
I do think as well we can't skirt around the issue of coercive control. You know, there is no. People are suffering in Northern Ireland with this issue. You know, approximately 20% of all crime in Northern Ireland is domestic abuse, and that's just the people who come forward to the police. It's a reality that many people are living with, and we have to be explicit and not shy away from talking about domestic abuse. It impacts so many households, every society, every community, every race, colour, creed. Everyone is affected by it.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Thanks both of you for coming. And I want to commend Women's Aid for the work they do. I know I've had engagements with them in the past, and I know the fantastic work they do, and you know, provide a refuge for women who are in real crisis situations. So thanks for that. You may have heard me mentioning to previous witnesses that some of the faith-based organisations or some of the churches want to overlay an RSE curriculum with their own particular ethos. Now, in my view, that creates difficulties in some areas of delivering an RSE curriculum. And, you know, most of the churches have a particular view about same-sex relationships, about transgender, about abortion. but many of them are also patriarchal in nature and advocate, if not explicitly, certainly implicitly, you know, a patriarchal society. What would your views be on all of that?
We're feminists, and we fight as an organisation. We are dedicated to creating a world that's safe for women and girls and bring gender equality through that. So, as a feminist, I can talk about the patriarchy all day, but I think we're time limited. But it's something, that we are a secular organisation who are a feminist ethos. That's our ethos.
Yeah.
But do you think, in terms of the delivery of RSE, that those particular attitudes may be problematic?
Oh, definitely they are problematic, within that context. I think for, as Karen says, we don't hold any, within a feminist organisation that supports all communities. That's where we sit within that. But I think it's been hijacked a bit, in relation to that piece. It sits very uncomfortably with me personally. I don't know if commenting on behalf of Women's Aid, but I think, we need a generic programme that fits everyone, that all children are getting the same, and there's consistency across the board, not based on the school you go to, the religion you have, that, and that's, as I say, back to that basic human right of all the children within our community.
It's about bringing equity as well, because you might have a school that has a real, really, really good RSE programme and a school that might do maybe the minimum, but it's about, at the bare minimum, knowing how to keep yourself safe and what a healthy relationship looks like with yourself, with other people, everyone around you. So I'm personally about equity in terms of access to the information around what is safe and what is healthy. And I think that's, if you have a minimum standard, that benefits everyone in terms of that knowledge and that understanding, especially people coming from all walks of life.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. That's all I have.
So thank you, Deputy Chair. Cathy, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming today. And much like the Deputy Chair said, thank you for everything that you do. It's Women's Aid in Urian Down in my area, and I can say without a doubt it's the most important and most impactful organisation that I've engaged with. So just to put that on record. You mentioned there about the Helping Hands project, and you spoke about it, but you also mentioned about earlier intervention than that. Can you give us more of an idea of what that would look like, or where that would start?
Yeah, we've started the sort of focus groups in that. We did a workshop at Stranmillis with kind of academics, early years practitioners, all of that, to look at how we could develop. Dr. Brona McKee, who would have been a lecturer at Stranmillis years ago, she's since left, but she did a evaluation and a scoping exercise to see where Helping Hands would fit in the early years setting. And we've had so many nursery, we work with the Childcare Partnership and we deliver a lot of training for childminders and nursery school teachers and things like that. And they've all been asking for Helping Hands for years, And so we had it that it was, a little bit up the stage in relation to key stages. So following on from the evaluation, following on from our consultations, we definitely see that there is a space for that. So we're developing that at the minute. So after that scoping day, I suppose what they're looking at, it'll be developed as a holistic approach, maybe a little bit, it'll be different, working with families engaged in early year settings as well, and to promote early identification and response to risk. So it's looking at developing a creative Helping Hands resource building upon the core components of the Helping Hands model. And then we hope to pilot the resource as a holistic early intervention, capacity building approach with early years practitioners. Hopefully that'll be within statutory and community early years nursery settings, and it will be supported by a CPD accreditation as well. So we're hoping that will be up and running probably by the end of the year anyway, but a lot of the pre-work has been done in relation to that with some key partners.
So it just struck me because we're waiting on an early years and childcare strategy come along, and it strikes me that this is something that needs to be included in it. We're also waiting on a review of minimum standards, from the Department of Health. And when I think of daycare settings that are private businesses as well, it's surely something that should be a minimum standard for those as well to be involved in. So that's really, really useful actually to know that that's coming, and probably really important that the department's reaching out to you and shaping what that strategy looks like as well. Again, your presentation spoke for itself in terms of the figures and things that you were quoting. You did say something there, bringing the voice of the survivors into the room, and just in terms of the minimum content and what we're looking at the minute in RSE, and you mentioned about survivors shaping that. Do you think that's something the department need to do as well when they're looking at the curriculum and what actually they are equipping our children with? Should survivors and victims be a part of that and part of shaping what that looks like?
I think if you look at our SAY project, like they're the most powerful group of young people. I was with them at Queen's Saturday before last. We're doing a piece around the family courts and their children who have actually gone through this process. And it's heartbreaking listening to some of their stories. But I suppose a lot of the work that we do with survivors, it has to be meaningful and valuable. You know, it can't be tokenistic. If we look at the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, there's a stream in that is around lived experience, and also within the Executive Office's End of Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. We have that in there as well. And we are actually doing workshops with those departments around that meaningful engagement with survivors, how to do that well. We're also working with media around how to work with survivors and academics as well. So we're doing a whole piece around that. Karen, anything?
Well, one thing actually, just when you were saying that, what really struck me is when we were doing our consultation on the strategic framework for the End of Violence Against Women and Girls consultation, I interviewed women at various stages of their journeys, and one thing we talked about was preventive education. And I said, look, the women I'd say were probably from age 20 to about early 50s, and I said, do you ever remember learning about domestic abuse or what healthy relationships look like in school? And none of them said yes. They all said no. And that's the reality of it. It's something, domestic abuse is something that was shamed and taboo and secrecy, and one thing, anything that we do in terms of our consultation responses or any engagement is informed by survivors, and survivors are telling us that people need to know what domestic abuse looks like, because they think they see it in a movie and they see someone being physically hit, that's domestic abuse, and that's not the reality of it. But you wouldn't, anything in our society in terms of roads being safer, you would consult with those people who are living in that area, seeing how unsafe the roads are. You would consult on any other aspect that affects someone in that area or has unfortunately the lived experience of it. And survivors will tell us, if you need to change this to make this better for everyone else. And that's the young people in the SAY project. All they ever want to do is make the world safer for their friends. That's genuinely what one of them told me, and I'll never forget it, because it's so important, and why that lived experience is so important.
And you learn so much. You think you're on the right track with a training piece or something, and then we'll bring it to the survivor group. And and that's what's so important. But it has to be meaningful and valuable, and they really have to have a voice. The survivor engagement toolkit that we put together for organisations, including the government departments, for example, I said we're rolling that out and doing workshops. And there's 3 survivors in the room co-facilitating that process. So that's the real learning in the room too as well. And I think our response to RSE, 2023, I was going to say it was last year, but obviously we spoke to a lot of children and young people, within our services for that as well. So hopefully we always do, the voice comes into the room, but definitely it's a really fundamental part of this. You need to listen to kids, because and especially in the delivery of something like this, it has to, tick the right boxes for children and young people to be engaged, because they switch off pretty easily.
And they know their peer group best, I like to think I'm young and hip, but I don't understand how teenagers, how hard it is to be a teenager these days, so it's the reality of that.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much. It's really useful. Thanks, Chair.
Danny, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you. As I said, Women's Aid do amazing work. That's already been said, and I suppose for us, no offence to the other groups, but this is the best one comes last as we come to the end of our RSE. I think this is very important. When we started the mini inquiry, for me anyway, the biggest concern of RSE was about our young people not understanding relationships, and particularly young boys and men not understand it. And I had an incident in the area where I represent just there at the weekend, where a woman was out walking her dog. Women walk dogs because they feel safer walking a dog. Her dog was actually taken from her, and she had jewellery taken from her, and she was hit. I have a young daughter as well, and I need society to change. I need that education piece to be there and to be the best in it be, because it's not just about what can maybe happen behind closed doors where most of the abuse happens. It's about, I don't go out in society going for a walk and putting my keys between my fingers, or worrying what I'm on the phone to my friend to see I get home safely, or I can go up a mountain if I want to go a walk, or I jog wherever I please. My daughter can't do that, my wife can't do that, the women in my life don't do that, and they've learned that themselves just in society, and I think that's a sad indictment on the place that we live in, and it's getting worse, and that's why it's so important that it's a key component of the programme of government to end the violence against women. But this is what this mini inquiry for me is about as well, is making sure our young people get that education very early on, to see what it is to be in a relationship, to see how you treat your mother, your sister, your partner, and all of that, because we've been getting it wrong for far too long. And that's what one of my biggest concerns is about, the misinformation, and I'm sure you see that as well. Like last year there was so much out there about, they're going to teach our kids about pornography, they're going to teach kids about this, and what that done was elevated topics of what's so-called controversy around abortion and that, and then the opt-out comes into all of this, and then what we've lost, the actual education piece and all of it. So I suppose that was more of my just preamble, but it's just, what more can we do to be better as men, as parents, and again I suppose in our school setting, to make sure our kids are getting that, who may not have a male role model there in their lives.
Absolutely. I think that's so important and very well said, but I think if you look at the key messages within the Helping Hands, even at that early age, it's about we all have the right to feel safe, and it's how other behaviours can impact, so thinking even at that very young age, thinking about people around you and that kind of thing is so very important. I think it's great to see the commitment from the Executive Office, from our First Minister and Deputy First Minister for the new strategy, and that's cross-departmental then. I think it sits well with the Executive Office, but look, it's only a starting point, and both of them said that last week, that we're on the start of this journey. We're only going into year one of a strategy that we never had, when other parts of the UK are going into 13, 14 years of having such a strategy. What made us so different? And so we are playing a lot of catch up in relation to even RSC, if you look at what's happening in other parts of the UK. So we're playing catch up in relation to legislation and in relation to our language. If we think of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, it was all gender neutral. You wouldn't talk about the gendered nature of these crimes when we knew there was a very gendered nature to these crimes as well. So we welcome the conversations that they're starting, because that's what we need to change society as a whole. Start these conversations, within our communities. It's not all up to school, but it really isn't, and I think we have to be very realistic about that it is a societal change that we need.
Just one more wee point, and it would be just a concern probably around, you said teenagers, how difficult it is for them today. I'm just thinking around maybe catfishing and then also images being shared and the blackmailing side of that there, and we had that major story this year, but that's a real worry there. It's not, so I don't know if we'll have a handle on that.
I really feel sorry for teenagers these days. It's absolutely so hard to be a teenager these days. We have social media, have all these societal pressures on you. It's a really tough position to be in, a tough time to be a teenager. You also have being bombarded with information, even if you don't want to, and how that influences your peer group and how you talk about it. So it's about the trying to navigate and be a young person and try and do the right thing, but your group of friends are saying, no, do this, and you're getting bombarded by these messages, and you're not on the internet yourself, so you might not have a phone, but your peers are being influenced by someone on the internet saying you need to do this, you need to do that and the other. It's so tough, and it's important that young people feel comfortable coming forward. They may not talk to their school teacher, but they might talk to like a coach in their football club. They might talk to someone in a swimming club, for example, all the various other outlets that children and young people have in their day-to-day lives. But it's so tough, and all we can do as a society, as an individual, or as an organisation, or as government, or as the Assembly, is making sure there's resource and available and support there, and practical tools for children and young people. So for example, if I'm doing a campaign on our social media and it's specifically for an audience of children and young people, making sure that there's videos and there's examples, because that's how young people learn. You have to speak the language of young people to understand and convey to them how to appropriately tackle a situation. So, for example, if catfishing, we're talking about catfishing. Why do you think it's okay to manipulate someone or trick someone into sending you intimate images, and what are you going to do with those images, and pretend to be someone and playing with their feelings, and you wouldn't want that to yourself. And again, with sharing intimate images, there's so much pressure on teenagers to do that kind of thing, but it's important that we teach young people, don't pressure people into doing that. We can say to all young people, like, don't send intimate images, but like, we also need to send a message, don't pressure people to do that. Why are you doing that? That's not appropriate. So it's also flipping it on that side and being like, don't do those things that you wouldn't want someone to do to you, so it's simplifying the language. I probably could say it a bit more cohesively in another situation, but it's that reality. It's tough being a teenager, and it's coming from that point of making sure children and young people are prepared for life and feel safe, most importantly, especially because the world can be just a phone now, and reflecting on that and making sure there's appropriate safeguards and information for them.
Yeah, I think that's something we haven't talked enough about actually in the RAC. We're talking about actual physical sexual activity, but it's a phone as well.
Yeah.
And the amount of sexual abuse that takes place that isn't contact,
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
You, Danny. Michelle, you'd indicate?
I'm going to echo everybody's comments about thanking you for the work that you do, and it's so important, and I think hopefully that goes without saying, but it's absolutely worth saying to you as well. Obviously we've covered a lot of ground already, so I'll try and do something different and not say the same things again. Your social action youth, I was reading your stuff in your briefing was excellent, so thank you for that. It referred to bystander intervention training. I just wanted to really learn a bit more about what that training entails and what it covers. It kind of came into my head, I think I saw at lunchtime, there was a campaign launched today by PSNI and Justice Minister. It was really, really good, and it's talking about misogyny and calling out behaviours that are seen as just a bit of banter, but actually are the first step in terms of behaviours that can escalate. I think there was a lovely phrase the previous briefing used called a banter clinic in terms of their RSC, in terms of calling out those behaviours. Is that something that's covered in the bystander intervention training, or is it really more about helping people to report what they suspect or have witnessed in terms of domestic violence or domestic abuse? Does it cover all of those things?
I suppose within the post-primary programme, there's a bystander kind of module within that. But it's looking at safely intervening. I suppose within a lot of the bystander model training, we see a lot of our women within our services would say, well, that's really unsafe. If anybody had have jumped in at that time, it would have put me more at risk. So it's about starting to think about disrupting those conversations. If you're in the changing room, the football match on Saturday, and somebody says something, well, because people do follow. And if somebody calls it out, others will go, and maybe changing that kind of situation. It's looking at the allyship as well, isn't it? Around not just about males, but I suppose a lot of it is focused. We have to bring our men and boys with us, but you don't want to push them away as well, because we hear all this, it's not all men, and it's not all men, it certainly isn't. But I suppose the bystander intervention model would be part of the whole programme. And it's really looking at, safely interrupting conversations, safely interrupting those kind of situations, because you can put people more at risk. And so I think we have to be careful with the bystander. We talk about being upstanding, as well. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was at the lunch today, so I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but there is a social media campaign around that with like real-size videos around it, and it's 4 videos that will have various discussion points. So one of them is 2 fellas in a car, and one of them starts catcalling a woman passing, and the fella says, what are you getting on like? And then he actually gets out of the car and says like, are you okay, sorry about that? And obviously the woman walks away upset. Another one is a woman being sexually harassed in the gym, and trying to intervene there. So it's really about having those conversations, and it's very, very short. It's just like, why are you getting on like that? That's not on, but it is about, for the example of women, being out and about and safe. There'll be women who carry panic alarms, or there'll be women who, if something happened like on a bus or something, they don't know what to do, but it's about making sure that people are aware if something happens, going up and saying to the bus driver, or going up to the train conductor, or something happens in a school, feeling safe and going up to a designated teacher, for example. So these all open conversations, and there'll definitely be conversations when these start going out on social media, through to you and the police social media channels, and the conversations, I love when it comes. I love to have see a group of teenagers have organically react to that, being like, oh yeah, but it is little things. It's like if someone's leering at you on a bus or someone's making someone uncomfortable, regardless of gender. If I step in the way and that makes them feel less comfortable, like if I'm a wee barrier, that's fine. Little things that are silent but make such a massive difference. That we can all do to make people feel safer. So, for example, if I'm walking down a street at night and someone's behind me, I'm obviously not going to walk too close to them in case they think I'm going to jump them or something. Little behaviours that we can all do to make everyone feel safer, because there's very few people in this world who genuinely are incredibly malicious, and it's like it can be little things where like if there's a group of lads on a train and there's a young girl and she feels a bit feels a bit uncomfortable, it's about making sure lads maybe will walk down the train a bit more just so she feels a bit safer. Little things, those little behaviours that make women instantly feel a little bit less on their guard, genuinely. And a lot of women will relate to that experience. It's just the reality of it. So anything we can do in terms of tools and preparing is key, but it's making sure people know how to intervene safely and know where to signpost if something happens.
Is there advice in that as well about sort of online interactions? I know if I think about my colleague Saoirse at the minute, who's talked about her own experiences of domestic abuse, and she spoke openly about other incidents of, threats and things. And the response to that has been horrific.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people really just, first of all, questioning the validity of what she's saying, just assuming or wanting to infer that she's making things up, that it's attention seeking. It's absolutely vile, the stuff that I've seen online related to that. When you're doing this type of training, I mean, I assume you get into that as well, but you said most people are probably nice in real life. Online, they hide behind a mask and it just goes to another level. It's horrendous. Do you have advice for people around that, or just stay off social media?
As someone who looks at social media professionally and in my personal life, people put comments under stories, under newspapers about like domestic abuse or violence against women and things like that, and some of the comments are really, really vile. And I think if I saw like a family member or I saw one of my friends comment like it's calling that out going, I just saw you post this under blah 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 newspaper, what are you getting on, and people don't realise that. But you see, if you say something really victim blamey under a case like maybe domestic abuse or sexual abuse or something like that, you have just said to that person in your life who's suffering, you've just closed the door. They won't understand. They won't believe me. It's the reality of that. And I social media can be an absolute cesspit. I get that completely. And it's about navigating that in a safe way. But it is, if you know someone online who's being inappropriate, text them privately, say, call them out. That's not appropriate. What you're doing is just closing doors for victims and survivors, not opening doors for people to come forward. So
we
it's
get
people
a lot
being
of
thoughtful.
abuse around this as an organisation and personally as well, myself. So we have got advice. We've worked with Jim Gamble actually, and he's very good around that. But he always said, "Don't respond and mute everything, Sonia, and turn it all off." We turn off comments quite a lot. So we don't have anybody, because there's nothing worse than having those kind of comments out there. But there's a lot of organisations doing a lot of work around the online abuse, and through the Justice Backlash, it was great as well to see a lot of those changes built into legislation too.
One last question.
Very brief, yeah.
A broad one, just since you are our last RSE.
Ever?
Well, for this video, you are.
Get it right.
You're closing the contribution skills on that. What is your expectation of what we do with this mini inquiry now that we're drawing it to a close and we'll be looking to put a report together? You've given us your time. A lot of organisations have provided us with their genuine evidence. What is your expectation of us as a committee now that what action do we take on the back of this?
Well, I'll start, I suppose, and let you come in, Karen. I think for ourselves, as I said at the start, we've been having these conversations for so long. Let's get it right. As we repeat, it's a child's basic human right here. We've children and young people living with domestic abuse. You know the figures, you see them there. So we do need to make a radical change. It's not working. You've spoke to children and young people who say they're simply not getting enough or any RSE, and it just depends on where you live, what school you go to. That simply isn't fair. It really isn't. So you've got an awful lot of, between consultations and oral evidence, and you have a lot of work to do and a lot to consider between all of the differing views. But I think, the one person that is important in this is the child and young person. And that's what we always have to remember. So that's what I would take away, you know, the children from our SAY project, the children in our services, and I've all their heads and voices, you know, thinking of them. And I think, like everything else, it detracts, and we have to remember what we're here for, children and young people, and it has to remain the prime focus.
And the children and young people in our services, they want to create, as I said, a world where their friends are safe and they can all enjoy healthy relationships with themselves, with other people around them. You know, I left school 14 years ago, and as Sonia said, we've been having these conversations for years. I remember that conversation happening when I was still at school, and I just dread to think a 14-year-old is living in this place and doesn't feel prepared or understand what healthy, respectful relationships look like. Not just the birds and bees, but the reality of, you know, someone doesn't have a right to treat you, to force you to do things you don't want to do, to take your money, to call you this, that and the other, to stop you speaking to your friends, your family, you know, all those elements of coercive control and what abuse looks like. But it is about that equity, and the children and young people in the SAY project, you know, you can see the resources, they tell you what the change they want, but we need to live in a place where people are coming from all different walks of life and different faiths and different beliefs, and that's brilliant. But there has to be a minimum standard. We need to bring equity in Northern Ireland so young people can enjoy healthy relationships with everyone around them, whether it be you know, a familiar relationship, friendship, intimate partner, whatever scenario, and understand what that meaningfully looks like.
Thank you so much. You had indicated.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Thank you for your evidence this afternoon. This has been really excellent piece of written evidence, and I've really enjoyed listening to you. You might have missed it, I mean, because we've been talking a lot about consent, and you would have heard the last group that we had in, but there's one figure that I find really startling, and I'll just give it to you. So this is a group that does already do RSE in schools, and they had evaluated some of their teaching on it for 11 to 13 year olds with 7,500 respondents, and they said 87% of 13 to 18 year olds had an increased understanding about consent following their programme and how it impacts on future relationships, which I think is incredibly positive, because we've heard a lot of difficult things in this committee, but I think stuff like that I think is really positive. I want to just take that on, and in light of something that the Chair mentioned to you, and just read a little bit of your oral evidence, which is, you mentioned about educating young people is perhaps one of the most vital and important steps in eliminating domestic abuse in our society, and I wholeheartedly agree. All young people are developing relationships. They need to have the tools to understand the differences between what is healthy and what is abusive. This clearly fits with the curriculum statutory requirements of Learning for Life and Work, PD, key stages 3 and 4 in the areas of self-awareness, personal health and relationships. I mean, my sense, and I'll give you a chance to respond on this, my sense is that the curriculum standards are there, and it's actually about whoever is delivering RSE in whatever format needs, the Chair mentioned 2 areas, coercive control and consent, needs to just teach that in RSE at whatever level. Obviously 3 key stages, and some of those key stages, some of these areas are more applicable than others depending on the subject area and making sure it's age appropriate. Would you agree that the curriculum is flexible enough to actually teach this stuff? It's just about getting the providers, whether they be schools or external providers, to actually cover some of these areas?
I think if you look at the key thing for me is who delivers it, okay? Because that is very different depending on what the organisation will be. With our Helping Hands, we have the luxury where it's the teachers you're training and they are coming in, and we realise that's much easier in primary than it is in post-primary, because if we look at our teacher trainer colleges, whenever we spoke to them, you know, a lot of the teachers don't feel the confidence to deliver these subjects, and it would take a lot of training. You know, there's no training in any of our teacher training colleges in relation to the delivery of this. You know, it's a difficult subject to talk. You know, you're teaching science one day, then you're going in to talk about, you know, well, I suppose that's where a lot of our children get their that part of education through science, you know, through biology and nothing else, you know. But so for me, it's key around who delivers it, absolutely, because what is the ethos of that organisation and their values? you know, and that's where it is not the same across the board. So I think that's wherein we lie the problem, because there's so many different organisations delivering different things, and depending on the school where you are, if it's a faith-based or, you know, whatever is, you know, it is so difficult. And I think that's a real challenge you have in capturing all of that, all the different organisations coming into all of the different schools and what they're delivering. So I think for me that's an important part. And I think it would be better if it was one generic organisation kind of delivering that. But then you have the benefit of organisations such as Carafriend who could deliver that part. You could have other organisations who specialise in the online abuse, because you have to look at the specialisms as well. You know, our area of specialism is domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, you know. So I think there's space for that as well with regard to the specialisms of organisations. Have you anything?
I suppose just reiterating what you're saying, it is just preparing young people for the reality of that, and it can unfortunately just be the different voices saying different things, but the impact has to be strong, especially we're coming, as I said, from an organisation that's combating violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. There has to be a strong, consistent and equity for all children and young people in Northern Ireland about accessing that information and delivered in a way. And we appreciate that, like, some, you know, different organisations, you know, people who are facilitating that may be survivors of domestic abuse themselves. The prevalence of that is there. We, you know, and it's about making sure support's also there for the facilitators if they're impacted around that. But it's just the reality of we need to bring equity for children and young people in Northern Ireland in terms of being able to access knowledge about what safety looks like and what the law says and how they have a right to feel safe, regardless of whatever relationship it is.
Because Sia dropped a lot of stuff in the resource hub this week around violence against women and girls, and it's very good. But who has the specialised skills to deliver that within the classroom? They can pick up the resources, but, you know, whenever we go out to deliver workshops and things around domestic abuse, you know, we are the experts in that area, and we work and live and breathe that. And I think that's the challenge you have in pulling those things. We all feed into Sia and to the hub, but to be able to lift those things out, it's difficult and challenging when you're not trained and working in that area.
It's actually very interesting. Before Christmas, we delivered a session with young teenage girls at a sports from a sports background, and my presentation was about healthy relationships with yourselves and valuing yourself and loving yourself and who you are as a being and all those healthy relationships. And just talking about, you know, no one has a right to make you feel unsafe. And I could see some of the young people feeling uncomfortable. So I knew immediately, okay, there's probably lived experience in this room. So I adapted from that. But if you don't have that kind of, unfortunately, that knowledge and that experience of adapting and engaging with victims and survivors, I could have said something that might have been triggering or upsetting, but I knew immediately from body language, okay, I'm going to just change this up a bit. And that's the reality of adapting to making sure that children and young people feel safe in the environment, because I wanted them to feel safe while I was teaching, and I was able to adapt to that accordingly.
So we always get disclosures when we're out anywhere, no matter what the age or profession or what it is. There will always be someone after that session will come and share, whether that was me as a child, or, you know, that was me. You know, if we're in corporates, it doesn't matter, you know, wherever you
every
are.
Age.
But that's the reality and the extent of domestic abuse. So I think specialism is really important, and who delivers it. And children deserve to have that consistent approach as well.
Yeah, very briefly.
It's just to clarify, and that was really useful, and I really appreciate the example that you gave, Karen, in terms of your knowledge and being able to pick up on some of those key body language triggers in that example. Just to clarify, just in your evidence, you seem to suggest that the key aspects of some of the stuff you're delivering is already there and fits, I'll quote it for you, fits clearly within the curriculum statutory requirements for LLWPD at key stages 3 and 4 in the areas of self-awareness, personal health and relationships. It was just to say, is it therefore your view that actually the stuff that we're talking about, be it coercive control or consent, which is obviously being taught already in schools, you know, can be taught, it doesn't necessarily need to be mandatory? Your evidence seems to suggest that actually it can be taught at this point in time.
Well, I think it's not being taught in all the schools is the issue. So if you had the opportunity to include coercive control and consent given the changes to legislation very recently, and especially around the child aggravator. I think, I suppose that's subjective.
I think domestic abuse makes people uncomfortable to talk about completely. And I think, one issue I always say intersectionally about talking about domestic abuse is people think it's like there's classism there, there's all these other issues where people think, oh, we live in a really nice area, domestic abuse doesn't happen in our schools or with our parents and things like that. And that's really it's totally not the case. It is a vast spectrum, affects every social, economic class, every race, colour, creed, everyone in society can be affected by it. So making it mandatory, because it is uncomfortable for someone to say, we don't really need to teach that, it's not really happening in our school. Sure, we've not had an operation on conference referral. It's not the reality that a lot of children, young people are living in. So making it mandatory explicitly, I think would stop people thinking, oh, we don't really need that, and we'll briefly mention it, but it's not something explicit to us, and that's not the case. We see it through our doors often throughout Northern Ireland and Women's Aid.
Thank you. And look, these are things that we'll have to try and wrestle with as we come to a final report. I've got the minimum content in front of me for Key Stage 4, and it does strike me every time I read it how high level it is, and it affords a huge amount of flexibility. But that's a conversation for another time. Look, I think it's been very clear today from the committee that there was a real appetite to put on record our thanks for the work that you do as an organisation. So I hope that has been noted, and we thank you for your time and your evidence today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So. Again, I don't think there are any actions arising from that other than to feed the evidence into the inquiry. So that unless there's anything anyone wants to raise, Kathy?
Just one. So I was wondering about the earlier childcare and earlier strategy. I'm not sure if the department has engaged with the likes of Women's Aid around that. Maybe just to say that we had raised that today, and it seemed like it would be a good idea for them to engage with the department.
We agreed. We right along those lines. Great. Okay, that's great. So that takes us on to, unless anyone needs a comfort break, we can break quickly for 5 minutes if people would like to, or we can carry on. No. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, that's fine. Yes, we can do that. If we could just move into closed session there for a few minutes.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Oh, sorry, Kathy's not back. Sorry, apologies. We'll switch back.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Perfect timing. So that's us back into open, that's us back into open session there, members. So item 8 on the agenda there is correspondence. So pages 31 to 44 in your packs, and also there was an extra bit came in tabled papers there, and a summary notes at page 31. So we'll just go through anything at all that needs a committee decision, and then everything else will be as per the note. So the first one there, item 8.2, it is correspondence from the Minister, and it was regarding some of the departmental staffing issues that had been raised. So there's a few things in there to to have a look at. So I just wanted to raise with members, there was one particular point of clarification I was going to suggest that we go back to, but if there's anything that at any point we feel would be better discussed in closed session, if it's potentially crossing over with any individual member of staff, then we'll do that. The bit that I wanted to just flag initially was the question at number 5 we had asked around, and this is around the current scenario where we have an acting permanent secretary in post, and there was a question around whether it was appropriate for one individual to hold both roles. I suspect the department has maybe misunderstood what we were asking there. Our question was around the deputy permanent secretary role and the permanent secretary role. They have just addressed the accounting officer and permanent secretary role, which are of course always held by the same individual. I'm not sure how that misunderstanding arose, but looking at the staffing table, it does appear that the deputy permanent secretary role in question is currently not held by anybody. It is vacant. That's the deputy secretary role for resources, governance and early years. So I would suggest we may want to go back and just clarify what the committee's question were. That's obviously a really critical role in the organisation. When we look at some of the areas of responsibility, early years childcare and children and young people strategy, I mean, that's huge piece of work the committee is very interested in, and we then also have education workforce, and we're obviously got issues around addressing issues around industrial relations and pay and teacher workload, and obviously just the financial governance aspect of the department as well. So I think I would be minded to suggest we do go back to ask about when that position is likely to be filled, and just how that leadership gap is being addressed in the department at the moment. Are we agreed?
Right.
Okay. The other aspect of the correspondence I did just want to flag was the answer to the first question, and I would just suggest, as it does maybe start to bring in individual staff and issues, that we perhaps move into closed session if members are agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Okay, and that's just to confirm there, as we're back onto the public session, that there was an agreement to write for some further clarification around some staffing issues within the department. Okay, item 8.3 is at page 35, and that's a response from the department regarding the process for the appointment of the new chairperson of the Education Authority. And that response indicates that at the end of the recruitment process, the Minister was presented with an unranked list of candidates who were suitable for appointment. There wasn't any record of how many candidates were considered suitable for appointment, and while it was stated that the Minister would have outlined his rationale, that hasn't been provided in this particular correspondence. So it's really just to again, I'm happy to open this for committee discussion in terms of whether there's any further actions that anybody is seeking to take in relation to this particular item. So I'll open it up to the floor, or otherwise we can note at this stage. Not hearing any further views. So I mean, I know there had been concerns raised around the appointment in terms of perceptions, I think, of potential conflict of interest. I don't think anybody wants to say that there has been any conflict of interest demonstrated, but some concerns around that. But if there's no views around taking that correspondence further, I'm happy at this stage to suggest that we note. Okay. That takes us on then to the only other item that I think needs to be highlighted at this stage. Let me just double check at item 8.4. No, so in turn that was to note. So item 8.5 is an invitation from the Children's Commissioner to an environmental event at the end of March. I just propose that members note that for their diaries. Are we agreed? Great. Okay. So that takes us on then. In tabled papers, there was also an item of correspondence which I should just flag, which came from Museums NI in relation to their consultation that they're asking the committee to respond to. My suggestion would be that individual party groups may want to respond to that, and I think we could potentially leave it to be responded to on that basis, but I would want to just give members the opportunity if they felt that there was a need for a committee response to the consultation from Museums NI. So just to check. I'm not sure we
agree with what you said earlier about each party.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine.
Visits,
okay. I think in terms of committee time, we probably need to be rationing that a little bit. So no, we'll leave that for any individual party responses. Thank you for keeping me right. I'm prone to overlooking tabled papers. Apologies. So that takes us on then to item 9, which is the forward work programme. So if we can just move then to page, that should be at page 46 in your packs. I'm just going to again propose for some of this session that we just move into a closed session so that we can have a little bit of a conversation around how we prepare for the Minister's attendance at committee, and then we consider the rest of the forward work programme in open session. Are members agreed? Okay. We could just move into closed session then.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay, just to confirm back into public session, and just to confirm, we just had a discussion around the Minister's attendance at committee next week and the direction of the forward work plan, and just sort of working out some of the administrative details around that. Okay, that takes us on to item 10, which is any other business. Is there any? No. And that's then the final item on the agenda is item 11, which is date, time and place of next meeting, and that will be Wednesday the 5th of February, room 29 at 2 p.m. And our members agreed that the committee meeting does now adjourn.
Agreed.
Committee Room 29, Sound. Committee Room 29, Sound.